It's getting dark outside, snow is gently falling, and somewhere in a cave thousands of years ago, your great, add about 1,000 more greats, grandparents are settling in for the night. The wind howls outside, but inside their cave, there's something magical happening, a warm, crackling fire that dances on the stone walls, creating shadows that look like ancient stories coming to life. Let's travel back in time, way back to when winters were really cold. We're talking about the Ice Age, a time when much of Europe and North America was covered in ice sheets thicker than skyscrapers are tall. Can you imagine? The world was like a giant snow globe, and our ancestors were the tiny figures inside, finding ways to stay warm and cozy, despite the freezing temperatures all around them. The discovery of fire was probably the most important moment in all of human history when it comes to surviving winter. It wasn't just about staying warm, though that was certainly nice. Fire meant our ancestors could extend their day beyond sunset, giving them precious extra hours to talk, plan, and bond with their families. Think about it, without Netflix or books, those fire-lit evenings were the original entertainment center. Grandparents would tell stories, children would play with shadows on the cave walls, and everyone would share the day's adventures. But here's something really sweet to think about. Controlling fire required cooperation. Someone had to gather the wood, someone had to tend the flames through the night, and everyone had to agree on where to build it. This meant our ancestors had to work together, trust each other, and take care of one another. The firekeeper was probably one of the most important jobs in the group, like being the person who makes sure the heating doesn't break in your house during a snowstorm. Archaeological sites from hundreds of thousands of years ago show us that our ancestors were pretty clever about their fires. They didn't just randomly light them anywhere. They chose spots in caves where the smoke would naturally flow out, but the heat would stay in, kind of like having a perfectly designed fireplace. At a site called Qusem Cave in Israel, scientists found evidence of a fire that was kept burning in the same spot for generations. Imagine that, the same cozy corner where hundreds of families warmed themselves over thousands of cold nights. The warmth from these fires did more than just keep fingers and toes from freezing. It allowed our ancestors to move into colder regions they never could have survived in otherwise. As they followed animal herds north, they brought their fire-making knowledge with them, like carrying a piece of home wherever they went. Each group that moved into a new area had to figure out what local materials burned best, which woods made the most heat, which stones were safe to put near the fire, and how to keep flames going even in damp conditions. And here's a cozy thought. Around these fires, our ancestors were cooking their first hot meals. Before fire, everything was eaten raw and cold. But once they learned to cook, winter evenings became filled with the comforting smells of roasting meat, and perhaps even simple soups made in animal hide bags with heated stones. The chemical changes that happen when food is cooked made nutrients easier to digest, which meant our ancestors could get more energy from their food. Super important when your body is working overtime just to stay warm. Fire also became a gathering point for making tools. The light allowed them to work on crafting projects during the long winter nights. They'd sit together, chipping away at stones to make better hunting tools, scraping animal hides to make them soft and wearable, and probably gossiping about who in the tribe was the best mammoth hunter. These evening work sessions weren't just productive, they were social events that strengthened bonds between group members. The smoke from their fires had unexpected benefits too. It helped preserve meat, keeping it safe to eat for longer periods, essentially creating the world's first refrigerators, except they were more like smoke fridges. The smoke also kept insects away, which was probably a relief even in winter when hardy bugs might still be around. And that distinctive smoky smell, it probably became a comforting scent that meant home and safety to our ancestors, much like how the smell of a fireplace can make us feel cozy today. Different groups developed their own fire traditions. Some learned to bank their fires, covering them with ash to keep coals hot overnight without using much fuel. Others discovered that certain rocks, when placed around the fire, would absorb heat during the day and slowly release it through the night, like ancient heating stones. These weren't just survival techniques, they were the beginning of human technology and engineering. Young children would have grown up with fire as a constant companion. They learned from their earliest days to respect it, but not fear it, to feed it, but not let it grow too large, to use it, but never waste it. The skills of fire management were passed down from generation to generation through patient teaching and careful observation. Parents would show their children which materials made the best kindling, how to blow on embers just right to bring them back to life, and how to arrange logs so air could flow through them properly. As night deepens and our ancient relatives settle closer to their fires, we can imagine the sense of security those flames provided. In a world full of predators that hunted in the dark, fire was a protective barrier that said this is human space and we are safe here. The light pushed back against the unknown darkness, creating a bubble of warmth and safety where families could relax and rest. Think about the first person who figured out how to make fire from scratch, rubbing sticks together or striking special stones to create sparks. That person was basically the Einstein of their time, discovering something that would change the course of human history forever. And once that knowledge spread, it was carefully guarded and passed down like the most precious inheritance, because in many ways it was. The social structure of early human groups was probably built around the fire. Important decisions were made in its light. Couples might have had their first romantic moments by its glow, and children took their first steps in its warmth. The fire pit wasn't just a heating device, it was the heart of the home, the center of the community, and the symbol of human cleverness in the face of nature's challenges. The techniques for starting fires varied depending on what was available. Some groups became experts with the bow drill method, using a curved stick and string to spin a wooden shaft against a fireboard until friction created an ember. Others mastered the hand drill technique, rolling a stick between their palms with incredible speed and endurance. Coastal peoples might use flint and iron pyrite, creating sparks that could catch on dried seaweed or grass. Each method required its own special skills and materials, and knowing multiple techniques increased the chances of success. The type of wood used for fires was incredibly important. Our ancestors developed encyclopedic knowledge about trees and their burning properties. Hardwoods like oak and maple burned long and hot, perfect for overnight fires. Softwoods like pine and fir caught quickly and burned bright, ideal for starting fires or providing quick warmth. Some woods like willow barely produced smoke, perfect for indoor fires. Others, like cedar, created aromatic smoke that might have had medicinal properties or helped keep pests away. Fire maintenance was an art form. Too much fuel too quickly would create a roaring fire that wasted wood and might fill the shelter with smoke. Too little fuel and the fire would die, leaving everyone cold and forcing someone to start from scratch in the dark. The perfect fire was steady, consistent, and efficient. It required constant but gentle attention, adding a stick here, adjusting a log there, maintaining that perfect balance between heat output and fuel consumption. The cultural significance of fire went beyond mere practicality. Many ancient cultures developed spiritual beliefs around fire, seeing it as a gift from the gods or a living entity that needed to be treated with respect. Fire ceremonies marked important occasions: births, deaths, coming of age rituals, and seasonal changes. The eternal flames that some groups maintained weren't just practical, they were sacred, representing the continuity of the community across generations. The gathering of firewood was a communal activity that required planning and cooperation. In autumn, before the deep snows came, groups would work together to collect and store massive amounts of wood. They learned to select dead standing trees, which were already dry and would burn well. They discovered that wood stored off the ground, protected from rain and snow, would last through the winter without rotting. The woodpile became a symbol of preparedness and security. A well-stocked woodpile meant a warm winter. Fire safety was understood even in ancient times. Our ancestors knew that fires could escape control with devastating consequences. They developed safety protocols, clearing areas around fire pits, keeping water or sand nearby to douse runaway flames, and never leaving fires completely unattended. Children were taught from an early age about fire safety, learning through stories and supervised practice how to handle fire responsibly. The innovation of portable fire was another breakthrough. Our ancestors figured out how to transport fire from one place to another using slow-burning materials like fungus or bundled grass. This meant that when groups traveled, they didn't have to start from scratch at each new campsite. They could carry their fire with them, maintaining that continuous link to warmth and safety. It was like having a pilot light that never went out, ready to spring into full flame when needed. Fire also enabled our ancestors to modify their environment in ways that improved winter survival. Controlled burns in autumn could clear underbrush, making hunting easier and promoting the growth of certain plants that animals like to eat. The charcoal left from fires could be used for drawing, for medicinal purposes, or even as a form of primitive water filtration. Every aspect of fire was utilized, nothing wasted. The sounds of a winter fire became the soundtrack to ancient life. The crackling of burning wood, the hiss of moisture escaping from logs, the pop of resin pockets exploding, these sounds meant safety and comfort. They masked the frightening sounds of the night, the howl of wolves, the crack of trees in the cold, the whistle of wind through rocks. The fire's voice was a constant companion, a reassuring presence in the darkness. As we think about our ancestors gathered around their fires, it's amazing to realize that we're connected to them through this simple act. When we light a candle, start a fireplace, or gather around a campfire, we're participating in a tradition that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. The same fascination that makes us stare into flames today mesmerized our ancestors on cold winter nights long ago. Fire was and remains one of humanity's oldest and most faithful friends. The mastery of fire represented humanity's first major victory over the forces of nature. It showed that humans weren't just passive victims of their environment, but could actively shape it to meet their needs. This shift from reactive survival to proactive thriving was revolutionary. It gave our ancestors confidence that they could face whatever challenges nature threw at them, including the harshest winters. Different fire-tending roles probably emerged in ancient communities. Some people might have been especially good at starting fires, others at maintaining them through the night. There might have been specialists who knew how to create fires for different purposes: hot fires for cooking, smoky fires for preserving meat, or long-lasting fires for warmth. These specializations were the beginning of professional roles in human society. The chemistry of fire, though not understood scientifically by our ancestors, was manipulated through trial and error. They learned that green wood produced more smoke, useful for signaling or preservation. They discovered that certain stones exploded when heated, while others could be used to line fire pits. They found that fat and oil could make fires burn hotter and brighter, leading to the development of primitive lamps. Fire enabled our ancestors to extend their range into regions that would have been uninhabitable otherwise. The Arctic, with its extreme cold and long dark winters, could only be colonized by humans who had mastered fire. This expansion into new territories wasn't just about survival, it was about the human drive to explore, to push boundaries, to see what lay beyond the next hill or across the next frozen river. The emotional comfort provided by fire cannot be overstated. In a world without artificial light, where darkness meant danger and cold meant death, fire was a beacon of hope. It transformed terrifying nights into manageable ones, cold spaces into warm ones, raw food into cooked meals. The psychological impact of having a reliable source of warmth and light helped our ancestors maintain their mental health through long, difficult winters. As we prepare to move on to how our ancestors dressed and sheltered themselves, remember that none of those innovations would have been possible without fire. Fire was the foundation upon which all other winter survival strategies were built. It was the first and most important tool in humanity's winter survival toolkit, and it remains central to our relationship with winter even today. The legacy of those first firekeepers lives on in every heated home, every warm meal, and every cozy gathering of friends and family. When we flip a switch to turn on the heat or light a candle for ambiance, we're benefiting from knowledge that began accumulating around those first intentional fires so long ago. Our ancestors' mastery of fire was their gift to us, a gift that continues to keep us warm through every winter night. Now, let's snuggle deeper into our story and talk about how our ancestors dressed for success, winter success, that is. Close your eyes and imagine waking up in a world without central heating, without puffy jackets, without even a proper house. Just you, your family, and whatever clever ideas you could come up with to stay warm. Sounds challenging, right? But our ancestors were incredibly resourceful, and their solutions were both practical and surprisingly sophisticated. The story of winter clothing begins with a simple observation. Animals seem to do just fine in the cold with their fur coats. So naturally, our ancestors thought, if we can't grow our own fur, why not borrow some? The earliest evidence of humans wearing animal hides dates back hundreds of thousands of years. But here's the thing, you can't just throw a fresh animal skin over your shoulders and call it a coat. Fresh hides are stiff, they smell terrible, and they don't last very long. Our ancestors had to figure out how to transform these raw materials into comfortable, durable clothing. The process of making leather and fur clothing was incredibly labor-intensive, but also meditative in its own way. First, the hide had to be carefully removed from the animal, not too thick, not too thin. Then came the cleaning process, scraping away any remaining flesh or fat with special stone tools. Archaeological sites have revealed thousands of these hide-scraping tools, worn smooth from countless hours of use. Imagine sitting by the fire on a winter evening, rhythmically scraping a hide while chatting with your family. It was probably as common as scrolling through your phone is today. But the real magic happened in the tanning process. Our ancestors discovered that certain substances could transform stiff, perishable hides into soft, durable leather. They used everything from animal brains. Yes, really, brain tanning is still practiced today, to smoke, to mixtures of bark and leaves. Each group had their own secret recipes, passed down through generations like family cookie recipes. The whole process could take weeks, but the result was clothing that could last for years with proper care. Let me tell you about brain tanning, because it's absolutely fascinating. Every animal, it turns out, has exactly enough brains to tan its own hide. Isn't that remarkable? Our ancestors discovered that the oils and enzymes in brain tissue could transform tough hide into butter-soft leather. They would cook the brains into a paste, work it into the hide, and then spend hours stretching and working the skin until it became soft and supple. It was messy work, but the result was leather so soft you could sleep on it like a blanket. The invention of the needle was a game changer that happened around 40,000 years ago. These weren't metal needles like we use today, but delicate tools carved from bone or ivory with tiny eyes drilled through them. Think about the patience and skill needed to create something so small and precise with stone tools. These needles allowed our ancestors to create fitted clothing, pants, parkas, boots that hugged the body and trapped warm air close to the skin. Before needles, people probably just wrapped themselves in hides like blankets. After needles, they were creating fashion statements that were both functional and, dare we say, stylish. The thread our ancestors used was just as ingenious as the needles. They made it from animal sinew, the tough, fibrous tissue that connects muscles to bones. When dried and separated into fine strands, sinew becomes incredibly strong thread that actually swells when wet, making seams waterproof. They also used plant fibers, twisted and spun into strong cords. Some groups even used human hair for especially fine sewing work. Every material had its purpose, its strength, and its special use. Speaking of style, our ancestors didn't just wear boring, plain clothes. Archaeological evidence shows they decorated their winter wear with beads, shells, and even painted designs. They understood something important. When you're stuck inside for months during winter, you need things that make you happy. Pretty clothes weren't just about vanity, they were about maintaining morale during the long, dark months. A person wearing beautiful, well-made clothes felt human, dignified, and part of a culture, not just a struggling survivor. The layering system our ancestors developed would make modern outdoor enthusiasts proud. They understood that multiple thin layers work better than one thick layer. A typical winter outfit might include undergarments made from soft, supple leather, middle layers of fur-lined hide, and outer layers of water-resistant materials. They even figured out that different furs had different properties. Rabbit fur is incredibly warm but delicate, while bear fur is durable and water-resistant. Mixing and matching these materials created clothing systems that could handle any weather. Let's talk about those different furs for a moment, because our ancestors were real connoisseurs. Beaver fur was prized for its water-resistant qualities, the same properties that keep beavers warm while swimming in icy water. Wolf fur around the hood of a parka would create a protective microclimate around the face, with the long guard hairs breaking the wind, while the soft underfur provided insulation. Caribou fur, which is hollow, provided incredible insulation while being surprisingly lightweight. Each animal's fur had evolved for specific conditions, and our ancestors learned to match the right fur to the right purpose. Footwear was especially important. Cold feet could mean frostbite, which could mean death. Our ancestors created boots that were works of engineering genius. They used multiple layers of hide, stuffed them with dried grass or fur for insulation, and sealed the seams with tree resin or animal fat. Some boots even had removable liners that could be dried by the fire each night. basically the world's first bootliners. In really cold conditions, they might wear several pairs of socks made from fur or woven grass, changing them throughout the day to keep feet dry and warm. But clothing was only part of the equation. Our ancestors also needed warm shelters, and they got incredibly creative with their architecture. In regions where caves weren't available, they built their own shelters using whatever materials were handy. The most famous example might be the mammoth bone huts found in Eastern Europe, dating back about 15,000 years. These structures were made from hundreds of mammoth bones, covered with hides, and probably insulated with layers of grass or moss. Building one of these required the cooperation of many families and created a structure that could withstand fierce winter storms. The construction of these mammoth bone houses was an incredible feat of engineering. The builders would start with a foundation of mammoth skulls, turned upside down and partially buried for stability. Then they'd create a framework using tusks and long bones, carefully interlocked like a three-dimensional puzzle. The whole structure would be covered with hides, probably from the same mammoths whose bones formed the frame. It was recycling at its finest, using every part of these massive animals to create shelter from the harsh Ice Age winters. The design of these shelters was surprisingly sophisticated. They weren't just random piles of bones and hides. Archaeological evidence shows that our ancestors understood concepts like wind resistance and heat retention. They built their doorways facing away from prevailing winds, created ventilation systems to prevent smoke buildup while maintaining warmth, and even had separate areas for different activities: sleeping, cooking, and working. Some shelters had what we might call mudrooms today, small entrance chambers where people could shake off snow and cold air before entering the warm main living space. Inside these shelters, our ancestors created microenvironments of warmth and comfort. They used animal furs as carpets and blankets, creating soft, insulated floors and sleeping areas. They hung hides on the walls to create an extra layer of insulation, much like tapestries in medieval castles. Some groups even figured out how to create double-walled structures with air gaps for insulation, basically inventing the same principle we use in modern thermal windows. The sleeping arrangements were particularly clever. Our ancestors didn't just lie on the cold ground. They created raised sleeping platforms using logs or stones, then covered them with layers of dried grass, leaves, or pine needles, topped with soft furs. These beds kept them off the cold ground and provided surprising comfort. Family members would sleep close together, sharing body heat, a practice that wasn't just practical, but also strengthened family bonds. Children would sleep between parents, the safest and warmest spot in the shelter. Personal warming devices were another innovation. Our ancestors figured out that certain stones, when heated in the fire and wrapped in hide, could serve as portable heaters. They'd tuck these warm stones into their beds or carry them inside their clothing during particularly cold days. It's like having a hot water bottle, but made of stone. They also discovered that filling animal bladders with hot water created flexible warming packs that could conform to the body. Some groups even created foot warmers, special containers filled with coals that could be placed under fur blankets to keep toes toasty through the night. The management of humidity inside shelters was crucial. Too much moisture from breath and sweat could make clothing damp, reducing its insulating properties. Our ancestors learned to create ventilation systems that allowed moisture to escape while keeping cold air out. They also regularly aired out their bedding and clothing, understanding that dry materials insulate better than damp ones. On sunny winter days, you might see furs and blankets spread out on the snow, the cold, dry air pulling moisture from them like a giant natural dehumidifier. Different cultures developed unique solutions based on their environments. Groups living near hot springs learned to build their shelters nearby, taking advantage of the natural warmth and using the heated water for cooking and bathing. Imagine soaking in a natural hot spring while snow falls around you. Our ancestors enjoyed this luxury thousands of years ago. Coastal peoples discovered that certain seaweeds, when dried and layered, made excellent insulation. Forest dwellers became experts at using tree bark and pine pitch to waterproof their shelters. The igloos built by Arctic peoples represent perhaps the pinnacle of snow shelter technology. These domed structures, built from carefully cut snow blocks, could maintain interior temperatures of around 32 Fahrenheit even when outside temperatures dropped to -40. The key was the dome shape, which distributed weight evenly, and the use of ice for windows that let in light while keeping out cold. A small oil lamp could heat the interior enough for comfort, with the snow walls actually providing insulation. It seems counterintuitive, a house made of frozen water keeping you warm, but it worked brilliantly. The knowledge of which materials to use, how to process them, and how to combine them for maximum effectiveness was passed down through generations. Elders would teach youngsters not just the how, but the why certain furs were saved for baby blankets, why specific trees made the best shelter frames, why ventilation holes had to be just the right size. This knowledge transfer happened through patient demonstration and hands-on practice, creating a continuous chain of wisdom stretching back thousands of years. The mittens and gloves our ancestors created were marvels of design. They understood that mittens, which keep fingers together, are warmer than gloves, which separate them. But they also knew that sometimes you needed dexterity for fine work. So they created combination designs, mittens with removable finger sections, or gloves with an outer mitten layer that could be pulled back when needed. Some groups even developed waterproof mittens using fish skin or sealed gut, perfect for handling wet snow or ice fishing. Head coverings were essential since so much heat is lost through the head. Our ancestors created hoods attached to their outer garments, separate hats made from fur, and even face masks for the most extreme conditions. They understood that protecting the head, neck, and face was crucial for maintaining overall body temperature. Some of these designs were so effective that they're still used by indigenous peoples in the Arctic today, virtually unchanged after thousands of years. The development of waterproofing techniques was crucial for winter survival. Our ancestors discovered that certain animal fats, when applied to leather, made it water-resistant. They learned that the natural oils in some furs repelled water. Coastal peoples developed sophisticated waterproofing using fish oil and even created early versions of waxed fabric using beeswax or plant resins. Staying dry was just as important as staying warm. Wet clothing loses most of its insulating properties. The social aspects of clothing production brought communities together. Making winter clothes was rarely a solitary activity. Women and sometimes men would gather to sew, sharing techniques, stories, and companionship. Children learned by watching and gradually taking on simple tasks. A grandmother might start a parka that her daughter would continue, and her granddaughter would finish decorating. These clothing items became family heirlooms, carrying the love and skill of multiple generations. The repair and maintenance of winter clothing was an ongoing task. Our ancestors couldn't just buy new clothes when something wore out. They became experts at patching, re-waterproofing, and reinforcing their garments. Every scrap of material was saved and reused. A worn-out parka might be taken apart and remade into children's clothing or used to patch other garments. This recycling wasn't just economical, it was essential for survival. The ability to maintain and repair clothing was as important as the ability to make it in the first place. As we think about our ancestors bundled in their furs, building their shelters against the winter wind, we can appreciate the incredible journey from those first simple hide coverings to today's high-tech winter gear. But the basic human need remains the same: to stay warm, dry, and comfortable when winter comes calling. Our ancestors met that challenge with creativity, cooperation, and determination, setting an example of human resilience that continues to inspire us today. The legacy of their innovations surrounds us. Every zipper, button, and seam in our modern clothes builds on techniques developed over thousands of years. The insulation in our homes, the layering systems we use for outdoor activities, even the waterproof, breathable fabrics we prize, all have their roots in the discoveries our ancestors made while trying to stay warm through long Ice Age winters. Tonight, as you pull your cozy blankets up to your chin and settle into your warm bed, remember that this simple comfort is the culmination of thousands of years of human innovation. Our ancestors' determination to stay warm didn't just help them survive, it sparked innovations that would eventually lead to architecture, engineering, chemistry, and fashion. Not bad for people who started with nothing but animal skins and clever ideas, wouldn't you say? Let's settle in now and talk about something comforting: food. But not just any food, winter food in the time of our ancestors. Imagine having no refrigerators, no grocery stores, no pizza delivery on snowy nights. Yet somehow our clever ancestors not only survived, but often thrived during the coldest months. Their food strategies were so successful that many of them are still used today in various forms. The biggest challenge our ancestors faced was the seasonal nature of food availability. Summer and fall were times of abundance: berries, nuts, roots, and plentiful game. But winter? Winter was a different story entirely. Plants died back or lay dormant under snow. Many animals migrated to warmer regions or hibernated, and those that remained were often lean and hard to catch. Our ancestors had to think ahead, planning months in advance for the lean times. Food preservation was perhaps the most crucial skill for winter survival. Without it, any food not immediately consumed would spoil within days. But our resourceful ancestors developed numerous preservation techniques that would make modern preppers jealous. Smoking was one of the earliest methods. Hanging strips of meat over smoky fires not only dried them out, but also coated them with antibacterial compounds from the smoke. The process was slow and required constant attention to maintain the right temperature and smoke level, but the result was protein that could last for months. Drying was another fundamental preservation method. Our ancestors would cut meat into thin strips and hang them in the sun and wind during good weather, or near the fire during cold periods. They learned that the thinner the strips, the faster they dried, and the less likely they were to spoil. Some groups added salt if they had access to it, creating an early form of jerky. They also dried fish, creating a lightweight, protein-rich food that was perfect for winter consumption. But here's something really clever. Our ancestors figured out how to use the cold itself as a preservation tool. In regions with permafrost, they dug storage pits that stayed frozen year-round, creating natural freezers. They'd line these pits with stones and cover them with heavy logs to keep animals out. Imagine having a freezer that never needed electricity and never broke down. Some of these ice cellars were so effective that archaeologists have found preserved food in them thousands of years later. Fermentation was another discovery that probably happened by happy accident. Someone left some food in a container too long. It started to ferment, and brave or hungry soul decided to try it anyway. They discovered that fermented foods not only lasted longer, but could also be easier to digest, and sometimes even tastier. Fermented fish, meat, and plant foods became winter staples in many cultures. The fermentation process created beneficial bacteria that helped preserve the food, while also providing important vitamins that were otherwise scarce in winter. The autumn harvest season was incredibly important for our ancestors. This was when they gathered nuts, which were particularly valuable because of their high fat content and natural storage capabilities. Acorns, despite being bitter when raw, could be processed into nutritious flour that lasted through winter. The process involved crushing the acorns, leaching out the bitter tannins with water, and then drying and grinding the result. It was labor-intensive, but provided a reliable source of carbohydrates when other plant foods were unavailable. Root vegetables and tubers were another crucial winter food source. Our ancestors learned to identify which roots could be safely eaten and developed techniques for finding them even under snow. They created special digging tools and passed down knowledge about where certain plants grew and how deep their roots went. Some groups learned to mark productive spots during summer so they could find them again in winter, essentially creating the first agricultural maps. Winter hunting required completely different strategies than warm weather hunting. Snow could be both a help and a hindrance. On one hand, it made tracking animals much easier. Footprints, droppings, and disturbed snow told clear stories about animal movements. On the other hand, deep snow made travel difficult and noisy, alerting prey to human presence. Our ancestors developed specialized winter hunting equipment, like snowshoes, which distributed their weight and allowed them to walk on top of snow rather than sinking into it. The social organization of winter hunting was fascinating. Large game like mammoths, bison, or reindeer often required coordinated group efforts. Hunters would work together to drive animals into natural traps like ravines or bog edges, where deep snow would slow them down. These hunts required careful planning, clear communication, and perfect timing. The entire community would participate, hunters doing the dangerous work, others preparing to process the kill, children and elderly serving as lookouts or noisemakers to help drive the animals. One particularly clever strategy was persistence hunting in snow. Humans, with their ability to sweat and regulate temperature, could pursue animals over long distances in snow. The animals would overheat or exhaust themselves, struggling through deep drifts, while humans on snowshoes could maintain a steady pace. It wasn't fast or exciting, but it was effective. Ice fishing was another winter food procurement method that required patience and specialized knowledge. Our ancestors learned where fish gathered under the ice, how thick ice needed to be to support a person's weight safely, and how to create and maintain fishing holes. They developed specialized hooks, spears, and traps designed specifically for ice fishing. Sitting quietly by an ice hole, waiting for fish to bite, became a meditative winter activity that combined food procurement with peaceful contemplation. The distribution of food within groups during winter was based on complex social rules that ensured everyone's survival. Successful hunters didn't keep all the meat for themselves. It was shared according to established customs that made sure elderly, sick, and young members got their fair share. This wasn't just kindness, it was practical survival strategy. Today's successful hunter might be tomorrow's injured person needing support. These sharing networks created social safety nets that increased everyone's chances of surviving winter. Food preparation during winter was about more than just nutrition. It was about morale and comfort. Our ancestors developed warming soups and stews, cooking meat and whatever vegetables they had stored in water, heated with hot stones. These one-pot meals were efficient, using less fuel than multiple cooking fires, and the hot liquid helped warm people from the inside out. The cooking process also became a social activity, with family members taking turns stirring the pot and adding ingredients. Fat was particularly valuable during winter. Our ancestors prized fatty cuts of meat and learned to render and store animal fat for cooking and eating. They understood intuitively what we know scientifically, that fat provides more than twice the calories per gram as protein or carbohydrates, making it ideal for cold weather when bodies need extra energy for warmth. Bone marrow, rich in fat and nutrients, was considered a delicacy and was carefully extracted from every kill. Some groups developed trade networks that helped ensure winter survival. Communities living in different environments would trade preserved foods before winter set in. Coastal peoples trading dried fish for inland peoples' preserved meat and nuts. These trade relationships were about more than just food. They created alliances and backup support systems for particularly harsh winters. The psychological aspects of winter food were important too. Our ancestors learned to vary their preserved foods to prevent monotony. They mixed different dried meats, created various preparations of the same ingredients, and saved special treats for midwinter celebrations. These small variations helped maintain morale during the long, dark months when fresh foods were just a distant memory. Children learned about winter food preparation from an early age. They helped with gathering, watched preservation processes, and learned to identify edible plants even in their dormant winter state. This knowledge was literally vital. A child who knew how to find and prepare emergency winter foods could save their own life or their families if regular food stores ran low. The storage of food required careful planning and construction. Our ancestors built storage structures that protected food from both weather and animals. They created cache pits lined with stones or bark, raised platforms to keep food away from ground moisture and rodents, and even suspended storage bags from trees where bears and wolves couldn't reach them. The location of these food stores was carefully chosen and sometimes kept secret to prevent theft by other groups or discovery by animals. Seed saving was another crucial winter survival strategy. Our ancestors learned to save seeds from the best plants, storing them through winter for planting in spring. This wasn't agriculture as we know it, but it was the beginning of it. They understood that certain seeds needed to experience cold before they would germinate, that others needed to be kept completely dry, and that some could be eaten in emergencies if other food ran out. The preparation of emergency foods was a skill that could mean the difference between life and death. Our ancestors knew how to make flour from tree bark, how to brew nutritious teas from pine needles, high in vitamin C, and which lichens were safe to eat when nothing else was available. This knowledge was carefully preserved and passed down because even well-prepared groups might face unexpected food shortages due to spoilage, theft, or unusually long winters. Small game hunting continued through winter, providing fresh meat to supplement preserved foods. Rabbits, squirrels, and birds that remained active in winter were trapped using ingenious devices made from bent saplings, twisted plant fibers, and carved triggers. These traps could be set and checked daily, providing a steady trickle of fresh protein without the energy expenditure of active hunting. Children often learn to set and check these smaller traps, contributing to the family's food supply while learning important skills. The timing of meals during winter was different from other seasons. With short days and long nights, our ancestors might eat only 2 meals a day, saving fuel and food while adjusting their metabolism to the winter rhythm. The main meal was often in the late afternoon, when everyone had returned from their daily activities, but before darkness fell completely. This communal meal was a social highlight of the day, bringing everyone together to share food and warmth. Water procurement in winter presented its own challenges. Melting snow for drinking water required fuel, which was precious. Our ancestors learned to collect clean snow from specific locations, avoiding areas near animal tracks or human activity. They discovered that ice from certain sources melted into better tasting water than others. Some groups learned to collect and store rainwater in hide containers during autumn, letting it freeze, and then bringing chunks inside to melt as needed. The medicinal use of foods became especially important in winter, when illness could be deadly. Our ancestors discovered that certain foods had properties beyond nutrition. Garlic and onions, when available, were used to fight infection. Fermented foods provided beneficial bacteria for digestive health. Organ meats, particularly liver, were recognized as especially nutritious and were often reserved for pregnant women, children, or anyone showing signs of weakness. The role of alcohol in winter survival is interesting to consider. Many cultures developed fermented beverages that served multiple purposes. They were caloric. They lifted spirits during dark months. They could be safer than water if water sources were questionable, and the fermentation process preserved nutrients that might otherwise be lost. These beverages were usually low in alcohol content and consumed as food rather than for intoxication. Food taboos and restrictions during winter often had practical origins. Rules about not eating certain animals during specific months might have been based on observations about parasites, breeding seasons, or the quality of the meat. These cultural rules, wrapped in spiritual or traditional explanations, helped ensure food safety when people might be tempted to eat anything available due to hunger. The hunting of hibernating animals was a winter strategy that required specific knowledge. Our ancestors knew where bears denned, how to safely extract them, and how to process the valuable fat-rich meat. This was dangerous work that required courage and skill, but a single bear could provide enough fat and protein to sustain a family for weeks. The fat was especially prized and was used not just for eating, but also for lamp fuel, waterproofing, and medicinal preparations. Fish weirs and traps set before rivers froze could continue catching fish under the ice. Our ancestors built sophisticated structures that funneled fish into holding areas where they could be harvested throughout winter. These engineering projects required community cooperation to build and maintain, but they provided a relatively reliable source of winter protein. The psychology of hunger management was understood intuitively by our ancestors. They knew that staying busy helped distract from hunger, that drinking warm liquids could temporarily satisfy appetite, and that eating slowly and mindfully made food more satisfying. These strategies helped people cope during times when food was scarce, maintaining morale and preventing panic. The celebration of successful hunts or good harvests with feasts served important social and psychological functions. These occasions allowed people to eat their fill, strengthening their bodies for the challenges ahead, while also reinforcing social bonds and cultural identity. The stories told during these feasts often contained important information about hunting locations, animal behavior, or successful strategies, wrapped in entertaining narratives. Food stealing and hoarding were serious crimes in winter communities. The social rules around food sharing were strictly enforced because individual greed could doom the entire group. Punishments for food crimes were often severe, including exile, essentially a death sentence in winter. These harsh rules maintained the cooperation necessary for group survival. The transition from winter to spring diet required careful management. After months of preserved foods, the first fresh plants of spring could cause digestive upset if eaten too quickly or in large quantities. Our ancestors learned to gradually reintroduce fresh foods, often starting with broths made from fresh plants before moving to solid foods. This knowledge prevented the illness that could come from too rapid a dietary change. The stories and legends about winter food often contained practical wisdom. Tales of magical animals that provided endless food might encode information about where to find game during harsh winters. Stories about transformed foods or cooking methods might preserve important preparation techniques. These narratives ensured that crucial survival information was remembered and passed down, even by people who might not fully understand the underlying reasons. As we think about our ancestors' relationship with food during winter, we can appreciate how much planning, knowledge, and cooperation went into surviving the cold months. Every calorie was precious, every successful hunt was celebrated, and every bit of food knowledge was carefully preserved and passed down. The strategies they developed, from preservation techniques to social food sharing rules, laid the groundwork for the food security systems we have today. The legacy of our ancestors' winter food strategies lives on in many ways. Every time we can vegetables, smoke meat, or ferment cabbage into sauerkraut, we're using techniques developed thousands of years ago. The community potlucks, holiday feasts, and tradition of sharing food with those in need all have roots in the winter survival strategies of our ancestors. They understood that food was about more than just nutrition. It was about community, culture, and the shared human experience of facing challenges together. Their resourcefulness in finding, preserving, and sharing food during the harshest season shows us that humans have always been capable of remarkable innovation and cooperation when faced with challenges. The next time you open your refrigerator on a cold winter night, maybe spare a thought for those ancestors who figured out how to survive winter with nothing but their intelligence, cooperation, and determination. Their success in mastering winter food challenges is the reason we're here today, warm and well-fed, no matter what the weather outside might be. Now we come to perhaps the most heartwarming part of our story, how our ancestors kept their spirits bright during the darkest months. It's cozy to think about the human elements that made winter not just bearable, but sometimes even magical for our ancient relatives. After all, surviving winter wasn't just about having enough food and warm clothes. It was about maintaining hope, building community, and finding meaning in the coldest, darkest time of year. The concept of seasonal depression isn't modern. Our ancestors certainly felt the effects of shorter days and longer nights, but they developed remarkable strategies to combat the winter blues. One of the most important was the creation of winter festivals and celebrations. Archaeological evidence suggests that midwinter celebrations have been happening for tens of thousands of years. These weren't just parties, though they were that too. They were psychological survival tools that gave people something to look forward to during the hardest months. Think about it. When you know that in the deepest, darkest part of winter, there will be a celebration with special foods, music, dancing, and storytelling, it changes everything. Instead of dreading the approaching cold, you might actually look forward to it. Children would count the days, adults would prepare special items, and everyone would have something bright to anticipate in the darkness. These celebrations often coincided with astronomical events like the winter solstice, marking the point when days would begin to lengthen again, a promise that spring would eventually return. Storytelling became an art form during winter nights. With daylight precious and outdoor activities limited, our ancestors gathered around their fires and shared tales that had been passed down through generations. These stories served multiple purposes. They entertained, they educated, they preserved history, and they reinforced social bonds. The best storytellers were valued members of the community, able to transport their listeners to warm summer days or exciting hunting adventures with just their words. Imagine the scene: the wind howling outside, snow piling against the shelter, but inside, everyone is gathered close, eyes gleaming in the firelight as grandmother tells the story of how the stars came to be, or grandfather recounts the great hunt of his youth. Children would sit transfixed, adults would nod knowingly at familiar parts, and everyone would gasp at the exciting moments, even though they'd heard the story a dozen times before. These weren't just stories, they were the threads that wove the community together. The stories told during winter nights weren't just random entertainment, they contained crucial survival information wrapped in memorable narratives. A story about a clever fox outsmarting a bear might actually be teaching children about animal behavior. A tale about ancestors who survived a terrible winter would include practical details about food storage and shelter building. These stories were encyclopedias disguised as entertainment, ensuring vital knowledge was passed down even to those who might not pay attention to direct instruction. Some stories were specifically designed to help people cope with winter's challenges, tales of transformation, where difficult times led to wonderful outcomes, gave hope during hardship. Stories about cooperation, defeating powerful enemies, reinforced the importance of community. Funny stories about foolish characters who didn't prepare for winter served as cautionary tales, while also providing much-needed laughter. The storytelling tradition ensured that both practical knowledge and emotional resilience were passed down through generations. Music and dance played huge roles in winter survival. Our ancestors created drums from hollow logs and animal hide, flutes from bones, and rattles from gourds filled with seeds. The rhythmic nature of drumming and dancing wasn't just fun, it was physically warming and psychologically uplifting. Group dances got everyone moving, raising body temperature and spirits simultaneously. The repetitive nature of many ancient musical forms may have induced mild trance states that helped people cope with stress and anxiety. Picture a winter evening dance. The drummers begin a steady beat, someone adds a bone flute melody, and gradually everyone joins in. Children copy the adults' movements. Elderly members clap along from their warm spots by the fire, and young couples steal glances at each other as they move to the rhythm. The dance might go on for hours, with people dropping out to rest and rejoining when they catch their breath. By the end, everyone is warm, exhausted, and filled with the joy of shared experience. No one is thinking about the cold outside or worrying about tomorrow. They're completely present in the moment of community celebration. Winter was also a time for craftsmanship and artistic expression. With agricultural work impossible and hunting limited, our ancestors had time to create. They carved intricate designs into bone and antler, created jewelry from shells and stones, and painted on cave walls. These activities weren't frivolous, they were essential for mental health. Creating something beautiful helped people maintain their sense of purpose and identity during months when survival activities alone could become monotonous. The process of creation was as important as the final product. A person spending weeks carving a piece of antler into a beautiful figure wasn't just making art, they were engaging in a form of meditation. The careful, repetitive work required focus that pushed worries aside. The gradual emergence of beauty from raw material provided a sense of accomplishment and control, and the finished piece became a tangible reminder that even in winter's grip, humans could create beauty. The social structures that emerged during winter were fascinating. Extended families would often combine households for winter, sharing resources and body heat. These arrangements required sophisticated social negotiations: who slept where, how food was distributed, who made important decisions, but they also created opportunities for strengthening bonds. Young people learned from elders, children played together, and the entire community became more tightly knit through months of close quarters. Living in close quarters for months required incredible social intelligence. Our ancestors developed subtle ways of maintaining privacy and personal space even in crowded conditions. Perhaps certain corners of the shelter were understood to be private retreats. Maybe there were times of day when people practiced quiet activities to give others mental space. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, offering support when needed and space when desired. These social skills, developed over countless winters, laid the groundwork for complex human societies. Conflict resolution was crucial when people were stuck together for months. Our ancestors developed elaborate social rituals for managing disputes without violence. After all, you couldn't just storm off when there was a blizzard outside. They used mediators, held councils, and created formal ways to air grievances. Some groups had designated peacekeepers whose job was to maintain harmony during the stressful winter months. These early forms of governance and justice laid the groundwork for more complex societies. The resolution of conflicts often involved the entire community. When two people had a dispute, it affected everyone in the confined winter quarters, so everyone had a stake in finding peaceful solutions. Public apologies, symbolic gifts, and ritualized reconciliations helped heal wounds and restore harmony. The pressure to maintain peace was intense. A community divided by unresolved conflict might not survive the winter. This necessity taught our ancestors the value of forgiveness, compromise, and putting community welfare above individual pride. The care for vulnerable members during winter showed the best of human nature. Archaeological evidence reveals that injured or disabled individuals were cared for through multiple winters, sometimes for years. This wasn't just compassion, though compassion was certainly part of it. Communities understood that everyone had value, whether through their knowledge, their storytelling ability, or simply their presence as beloved family members. The person who couldn't hunt might be the one who knew all the healing herbs or could teach children important skills. Consider the elderly, who might seem like a burden in a survival situation. But our ancestors recognized their incredible value. They were the libraries of their time, holding decades of accumulated knowledge about weather patterns, animal behavior, plant medicines, and survival techniques. They were the keepers of stories, the teachers of skills, and the arbiters of disputes. Their presence provided continuity and stability. Children who grew up seeing elders treated with respect and care learned that every human life had dignity and worth. Winter was when much of the cultural transmission happened. Elders had time to teach young people not just practical skills, but also cultural values, spiritual beliefs, and tribal history. These teaching sessions were often formalized into initiation rites or coming of age ceremonies that took place during winter months. Young people would learn not just how to survive winter, but why their people did things certain ways, what their place was in the larger cosmos, and what responsibilities they had to their community. The teaching that happened during winter went far beyond practical skills. It was about transmitting an entire worldview. Young people learned the names and stories of their ancestors, understanding their place in a long chain of generations. They learned the sacred places in their territory and the stories attached to them. They absorbed the values of their culture, what behaviors were praised, what actions were forbidden, what qualities made a good person. This deep cultural education could only happen during the long, quiet months of winter, when there was time for extended conversation and reflection. Games and play were important winter activities that served multiple functions. Children's games often mimicked adult survival activities, playing hunt, building miniature shelters, or pretending to prepare food. These games were fun, but also educational, preparing children for adult responsibilities. Adults had their own games too, contests of skill, memory games, and strategic games played with stones or bones. These activities kept minds sharp and provided friendly competition that strengthened social bonds. Let me tell you about some of these games. String games, where complex patterns were created with loops of sinew or plant fiber, were popular across many cultures. These games developed fine motor skills and spatial reasoning while also serving as memory aids for stories. Each figure might represent a character or event in a tale. Guessing games and riddles exercised mental faculties and preserved cultural knowledge in memorable forms. Physical games like wrestling or contests of strength provided exercise and entertainment while establishing friendly hierarchies and allowing young people to test themselves in safe contexts. The development of counting and calendar systems was partly driven by the need to track winter's progress. Our ancestors created various ways to mark the passing days: notches on bones, knots in cords, or arrangements of stones. Knowing how long winter typically lasted, when the coldest period usually occurred, and when to expect spring's return provided psychological comfort and practical planning advantages. These early calendar systems were the beginning of astronomy and mathematics. The person who kept track of the calendar held an important position in the community. They would announce how many days had passed since the last full moon, how many more days until the usual thaw, when to expect the return of certain migrating birds. This knowledge transformed winter from an endless ordeal into a manageable period with a known endpoint. It gave people hope and helped them ration resources appropriately. The calendar keeper was part scientist, part spiritual guide, helping the community navigate through time as surely as hunters navigated through space. Spiritual and religious practices intensified during winter. The darkness and cold naturally led people to contemplate bigger questions about life, death, and meaning. Many cultures developed winter-specific spiritual practices, ceremonies to call back the sun, rituals to ensure spring's return, or practices to honor ancestors who had survived previous winters. These spiritual elements provided hope and a sense of control over forces that seemed overwhelming. The spiritual life of winter wasn't separate from daily survival. It was intimately connected to it. Prayers might be offered before eating preserved food, thanking the animals and plants that gave their lives. Rituals might be performed before venturing out in a storm, asking for protection from the spirits of wind and snow. Dreams were considered especially significant during winter. perhaps messages from the spirit world when the veil between worlds was thin. These spiritual practices provided comfort, meaning, and a sense of connection to forces greater than individual human lives. The concept of gift giving during winter celebrations has ancient roots. Sharing resources during the hardest time of year strengthened social bonds and ensured everyone had what they needed. A family with extra preserved meat might gift some to a family with excellent fur blankets, who might in turn share their warmth. These gift exchanges were investments in social capital that could pay dividends when fortunes reversed. Gift giving was an art form that went beyond simple exchange. The giver had to consider what the recipient truly needed, showing attentiveness and care. The recipient had to accept graciously, even if the gift was modest, recognizing the sacrifice involved in giving away resources during winter. Children learned generosity by watching adults share their precious supplies. The memory of who gave what to whom created networks of obligation and affection that bound communities together long after winter ended. Dreams and visions held special significance during winter. The long nights, limited diet, and possibly the carbon monoxide from smoky fires in enclosed spaces could lead to vivid dreams that were interpreted as messages from spirits or ancestors. Dream sharing became a morning ritual in many groups, with particularly significant dreams discussed and interpreted by the whole community. This practice helped people process anxieties and find meaning in their experiences. The tradition of winter hospitality was sacred in many ancient cultures. Travelers caught in storms could expect shelter and food from any group they encountered, regardless of tribal affiliations. This wasn't just kindness, it was a survival pact. The group you help today might save your hunters tomorrow. These hospitality traditions created networks of mutual aid that spanned vast territories and diverse peoples. The rules of hospitality were elaborate and sacred. A traveler arriving at a strange camp would perform certain rituals to show peaceful intent. The hosts would respond with specific welcoming gestures. Food would be offered before any questions were asked. The traveler would share news from other regions, providing valuable information about game movements, weather patterns, or potential dangers. These exchanges of hospitality and information created an informal communication network that helped all groups survive better. Personal grooming and hygiene rituals continued through winter, helping people maintain dignity and self-respect. Our ancestors created combs from bone, used certain plants for cleaning when water bathing was impossible, and developed ways to keep their living spaces relatively clean despite months of indoor living. These practices weren't just about health, they were about maintaining humanity and civilization even in challenging conditions. The astronomical observations made during winter nights led to profound discoveries. With long periods of darkness and clear, cold skies, our ancestors became intimate with the stars. They noticed patterns, tracked celestial movements, and began to understand the relationship between heavenly cycles and earthly seasons. This knowledge was both practical, helping with navigation and timekeeping, and spiritual, connecting human life to the vast cosmos above. On the clearest, coldest nights, when the stars seemed close enough to touch, our ancestors would lie on their backs in the snow and contemplate the universe. They created stories about the constellations, turning random star patterns into heroes, animals, and gods. These stories served as memory palaces for navigation knowledge. If you knew the story, you could find your way. But they also provided a sense of humanity's place in the cosmos, a reminder that even in the depths of winter, they were part of something magnificent and eternal. Love and romance didn't stop for winter. In fact, the long nights and close quarters might have encouraged them. Young couples would find moments of privacy despite crowded living conditions. Winter babies born in autumn after winter conceptions would arrive when food was plentiful and weather was mild. Some cultures developed specific courtship rituals for winter, recognizing that this season of introspection and closeness was ideal for forming deep bonds. The winter courtship rituals were often sweet and creative. A young man might spend weeks carving a beautiful comb for the girl he admired. A young woman might decorate a pair of mittens with intricate beadwork for her beloved. These gifts showed not just affection, but also practical skills and patience, qualities important in a life partner. The extended time together during winter allowed couples to really know each other, to see how they handled stress, boredom, and close quarters. Winter relationships forged in the crucible of challenging conditions were often the strongest. The education of children during winter was comprehensive and multifaceted. Beyond practical skills, children learned the stories, songs, and traditions that defined their culture. They absorbed values through observation and participation, rather than formal instruction. A child watching adults share food, resolve conflicts peacefully, and care for elderly members was learning lessons about cooperation and compassion that would shape their entire worldview. Winter was when children learned to be human in the fullest sense. They learned patience from watching adults work on long projects. They learned courage from stories of ancestors facing challenges. They learned humor from the jokes and pranks that lightened dark days. They learned reverence from participating in spiritual ceremonies. Every interaction, every observed behavior, every story told was shaping the next generation's understanding of what it meant to be part of their community. The role of humor and laughter in winter survival cannot be overstated. Our ancestors understood that laughter was medicine for the soul. They told jokes, played pranks within reason, and found humor even in difficult situations. The person who could make others laugh during the darkest days was as valuable as the best hunter. Laughter warmed hearts, eased tensions, and reminded people that joy was possible even in hard times. Humor served many functions during winter. It could diffuse tensions before they exploded into serious conflicts. It could provide a safe way to address problems. A funny story about a foolish person might actually be gentle criticism of someone's behavior. It could build solidarity through shared laughter. And perhaps most importantly, it could transform suffering into something bearable. The ability to laugh at difficulties didn't make them go away, but it made them feel less overwhelming. Winter nights were when philosophy and deep thinking flourished. With time to reflect and discuss, our ancestors pondered questions about existence, morality, and the nature of the world. These philosophical discussions weren't abstract exercises. They helped people make sense of their lives and find meaning in their struggles. The wisdom that emerged from these winter conversations was passed down through generations, forming the foundation of human philosophical thought. As the winter months progressed, communities would develop their own rhythms and routines, morning rituals of tending fires and sharing dreams, afternoon activities of crafting and food preparation, evening gatherings for stories and songs. These routines provided structure and predictability in a season that could feel chaotic and threatening. They gave each day purpose and meaning, transforming mere survival into purposeful living. The final weeks of winter were often the hardest. Food supplies ran low, everyone was tired of the cold and confinement, and spring seemed impossibly far away. This is when the community bonds forged during the earlier months became most important. People who had laughed, cried, worked, and celebrated together for months wouldn't abandon each other now. They would share their last food, tend each other through illness, and maintain hope together that spring would come. And then finally, the signs would appear: a certain bird's call, the particular quality of sunlight that said the season was turning, the first bare patch of ground where snow melted. The community that had survived another winter together would celebrate with joy that we can barely imagine. They had faced the darkness and cold together and emerged into light and warmth. Every person was a survivor, every relationship had been tested and strengthened, and the community as a whole had proven once again that humans together are stronger than any winter. As you drift off to sleep tonight, in your warm bed, perhaps think kindly of those ancient ancestors who figured out not just how to survive winter, but how to remain human while doing so. They maintained their creativity, their compassion, their humor, and their hope through months of darkness and cold. They transformed winter from a season to be endured into a time of stories, songs, and strengthened community bonds. The legacy of their resilience lives on in us. Every time we gather with family during holidays, every time we help a neighbor during a storm, every time we tell stories or sing songs on a winter night, we're continuing traditions that stretch back tens of thousands of years. The same spirit that helped them gather around fires on freezing nights lives on in us. That distinctly human ability to face challenges together, to find light in darkness, and to create warmth even in the coldest of times. Their greatest discovery wasn't fire or clothing or preserved food. It was that community, creativity, and compassion could transform even the harshest winter into a season of human connection and growth. They learned that winter's challenges, faced together, could make them stronger, that long nights were perfect for stories and songs, that close quarters could build closer relationships, that shared hardship created unbreakable bonds. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be as peaceful as a winter night in a fire-warmed shelter, surrounded by the gentle breathing of your loved ones and the ancient comfort of human community. Rest well, knowing that you are part of an unbroken chain of winter survivors, inheritors of tens of thousands of years of wisdom about how to find warmth, hope, and joy, even in the coldest season. The story of how our ancestors survived winter is ultimately a story of triumph, not just over nature, but of the human spirit itself.